we've talked a little bit about team needs, but we've really only talked about team needs when it comes to the prospect that we've been placing for these teams. There's a lot of other needs, right? These teams pick a top 10 for a reason. So let's take a little bit more of a wider scope. What these teams could actually use in the grand scheme of things. So let's start at number 1 with the Houston Texans. When you look at this team, I know they're picking number one for a reason. They only got one win in this year. But what do you think are the top team needs for a team like the Texans?
Yeah, and I just want to go out and say, first off, if you're at this point in the draft, usually, obviously these teams aside, because they traded into those spots, but if you're at this point in the draft, usually there's a lot of needs. So to say, oh my God, outside of the quarterback position, let's put that one aside. To say, oh no, we need a tackle, so draft the best tackle. We need this position. It's like, no, when you're at that point in the draft, usually you just want the most impactful guy. You look back to this past year's draft, who among those top teams at the top of the draft would not want Sauce Gardner again? It's like, oh, maybe you don't need a corner, but would you want a Sauce Gardner? Hell yeah, you would. So that's my take on needs at the top of the draft, but it does still kind of predict where you'll end up looking, where you'll put your scouting resources, and where you'll go in the later round. So Texans, this one's obvious, right?
Yeah.
Quarterback. QB. Write it in there. That's where they're going. You almost have to. It's a good enough quarterback class.
Yeah.
That's where you're going. But then they have a number of other needs after that. You're going to look along the defensive line. Their defensive tackle position is rough right now. Interior offensive line. You obviously need some weapons for your quarterback.
Right.
There's not a lot of positions that if a talent's staring you in the face there, you're not going to want to draft. Truthfully, I don't think there's a single position on the roster. Maybe offensive tackle. Because you got Titus Howard, you got Laramie Tunsil. That might be the only one where it's like, let's look elsewhere. Also not a strong tackle class. So that's my take.
It seemed like they also kind of pissed off Brandon Cooks around the trade deadline. It was like, oh, we're going to trade you. Now we're not. Now you're kind of stuck in this situation. So I think that after quarterback, wide receiver is next for me. That's a terrible R, but you guys understand. Oh, I fixed it there. But then basically, I'm just going to say.
Keep going. Just
impact player. That's what I'm going to go with for the Houston Texans if we are giving a third one
Basically, don't draft a running back. You have Dameon Pierce. Don't draft a running back.
Sure,
is what we're
right.
saying.
I think that's the right way to do it.
Guy.
If it's going to be a defensive pick, they drafted Derek Stingley, top of the draft last year. They drafted Jalen Petrie. I think that they've invested in the secondary enough. It feels like it's going to be up front, right? If it's going to be either this pick or the other pick that they have right outside the top 10, probably going to be quarterback at the top. But if they're going to go defense, I feel like it's going to be defensive line.
D-line. You have Jonathan Grenard. That's your one, quote-unquote, building block. One long-term player on that D-line that you feel good about. So at that point, DTs, another edge, anywhere you go.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Chicago Bears. What do we think about Chicago?
Chicago.
There might have been a point in time where we were talking about quarterback. We're not talking about quarterback for Chicago.
Now I'm talking about quarterback for Chicago, and that's a good spot to be in if you're not talking about quarterback. So ideally, if you're there, you're trying to look back into this range, get some more picks, get a lot more picks, maybe still get one of the best defensive linemen in this class.
I'll write that in there.
So write a little trade in there, but I would also just highlight defensive line. You got rid of Robert Quinn, Khalil Mack, Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, all in recent years. That was, what was it, the 2017, when they were at their best. That was the fuel of this team. It's all gone. It's all out the door. So at that point, anywhere along the defensive line, whether it's Will Anderson, whether it's Jalen Carter, you can't go wrong with either.
D-line's obviously a strong consideration there, especially if you're picking in this range, right? I'm gonna write wide receiver here as well, just because this is another team that desperately needs playmakers in the passing game. They've got the run game figured out. They're very similar to, we'll talk about the Falcons obviously later, but they're similar to the Falcons in that they've got the run game, right? I believe David Montgomery is a free agent coming up, so we'll see if he ends up being back. But even if he's not, you like what you've seen from Khalil Herbert. Justin Fields obviously brings plenty to the run game himself. The offensive line, really good at run blocking right now, but in order to compete with the best, as we're seeing, hence their record at number 2 overall, you've got to be able to get playmakers in the passing game there. So I think the wide receiver's got to be next on this list.
Agree as well. But to go back to kind of the positional value argument and kind of philosophically how you want to draft and why we bring up defensive line first, look at the elite guys along the defensive line, whether it's edge, whether it's Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, those guys, whether it's defensive tackle with Aaron Donald at that position. Fletcher Cox was for the past decade as well. I guess Chris Jones a little bit of an outlier there. But the vast majority at that position, top 10 to 15 picks. The NFL can identify the athletes that succeed at that position better than pretty much any other position in the NFL. So if you're going to get a high-end impact defensive lineman, chances are it's going to come at this point in the draft. Yeah, you can get a guy who can be serviceable, impact players later in the draft. That happens. There's just so few that end up being in that upper echelon that get drafted later that this is where you want to address.
And often when you find defensive linemen who are impact players that you found later, they're probably like specialization players, right? Where you're putting them in a certain role to succeed. And that's not a bad thing, especially if you set up your team the right way. Yeah. But if you want an all-encompassing, full package defensive lineman kind of player, you get these guys. You get these guys up here. What about the Seattle Seahawks?
Seattle Seahawks kind of, again, defensive line. Yeah. Like that's anywhere on the defense you could probably address defensive line, getting another cornerback across from Tariq Woolen. That's a real impact guy. We've obviously pegged a few guys to them over the course of our mock drafts this season to the Seahawks and the quarterback position, but defensive line is again where I'm looking. If you're ending up this high in the draft, you're probably re-signing Geno, or at least at the very minimum, franchise tagging Geno at that point. Defensive line is where I'm looking. You got your 2 tackles. That was the hardest position. That's the only other position you usually consider this high in the draft. You got those. You're good there. Now look defensive line.
Right. If we were making this into a mini mock draft, Bryce Young at 1, for these 2, it's basically like pick which one's getting Jalen Carter, pick which one's getting Will Anderson. So I agree with you. I think these are their top 2 needs. I'll throw in, just for a third one, I'd want to hear what you have to say. Again, wide receiver. Now, are they going to be drafting a wide receiver at 3? No. They're not going to be drafting a wide receiver at 3. You're going to be drafting one of these positions if you're picking this high in the draft. Although I will say, getting a legit or at least a better wide receiver 3 option behind Tyler Lockett, behind DK Metcalf, I do think that's important for this team.
No more Marquise Goodwin slander on this. I'm a big fan of that. I like how they built that receiving core where the wide receiver 3, at least they've been trying for that wide receiver 3. They drafted D. Eskridge in the second round, who that was a reach in my opinion. I don't think he's ever going to develop into too much there. He's already on the older side of the receiver position when he was coming out. Marquise Goodwin, but I like a speed wide receiver to pair next to those 3 guys because that just adds a level of dynamism to that core where it's like, sure, you can put a guy over the top of DK Metcalf, but if your third wide receiver is a Marquise Goodwin like it is now, or a guy that can really get down the football field, you really can't focus all your attention to him.
Lions at 4. Hottest team in the NFC, according to you on yesterday's show.
Hottest team in the NFC, and it's because the offense. They really don't have too many needs on the offense side of the ball. The only real need there is probably tight end after they trade away TJ Hawkinson, because I think they've completed that receiving core to a degree now with Jameson Williams coming back. We'll see what they do with DJ Chark long term. But I love this offensive line, one of the best in the NFL. Obviously, quarterback is the other one where it's like some Lions fans are fine with Goff. Maybe they take the swing at a guy in a rookie deal because Goff is still pretty expensive. So the only place I'm going offensively is QB. Defensively, pick. Anywhere. I think anywhere you could address defensively.
All right, we'll have QB as the third one here, but what would be the top 2 then? I think D-line would be the top.
D-line, yeah.
Okay, so D-line's top.
It's probably interior defensive line there. You have Aleem McNeil on the interior who's actually shown something, but after him, no one's really shown anything.
D-line, I'm going to say corner, right?
Yeah.
Am I crazy?
Someone across from Jafar Kuda.
All right.
Even though I like Jacobs.
And then QB. I think that makes sense, right? These are the top 3 needs for the Lions, but I really do. When I look at number 4 overall, it's got to be D-line. I think it has to be D-line.
It's got to be this one, right?
You're saying,
we'll see.
We're going with the Goff strategy? I don't know. We'll see. Fans seem a lot more split on that than I thought that was going to be the case. When we did our mock draft last week, I was trying to run an exercise really just to see how it would go. And I had the Lions drafting 2 defensive players with their top pick and then the one that's now outside of the top 10 as well. And I was like, I'm going to get killed for this. This is going to be awful. And so many people were like, no, I actually like this. But then, of course, other people said, how can you get out with the QB? So,
see, my take is they finally have a good offense. So they're like, why were you trying to mess this up, right? Which I don't blame. But if you objectively throw for throw, go look at Goff's production, his obviously PFF grades are one of the worst in the NFL this season, despite the Lions offense still humming. It's because the talent around him is pretty damn good right now. Like, they got a good situation for a young quarterback to develop. That's why I'm really team, if they are ending up with a top 5 pick, team draft one of these QBs.
I don't know how in on this quarterback class I am outside of Bryce Young, but we'll move on. Philadelphia Eagles. This is the ultimate wild card spot because New Orleans lost to the Buccaneers. That means that the Eagles once again have a top 5 pick because this is New Orleans' selection. What are the Eagles going to pick? This is the team with the best record in the NFL. What's the team needs for the Philadelphia Eagles?
Team needs safety, Possibly, we'll see what they do with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson long term.
Right. I think Ebb's a free agent as well.
Running back, Miles Sanders,
he's free agent. Yeah.
You're not taking probably either of those picks in the top 5. I don't think there's a position that or a player at either position that would warrant that for me. And obviously not the Eagles' MO either.
What about interior defensive line?
But that's probably where they're going.
Okay.
Fletcher Cox getting up there.
Yep.
Javon Hargrave, obviously towards the end of his deal. I think they're just knowing Howie Roseman. It's not a need. Obviously, they typing in whatever. The need would be running back, would be safety, but that's not where they're going with the top 5 pick. They're going somewhere along the defensive line if I had to bet money.
Corner is one of those positions that I always lean staying ahead of the curve rather than knowing, oh, Lord, we are not as good at corner as we thought we were. James Bradbury playing well this year, having a lot of ball production, but he's going to be 30 next year.
I believe he is on a 1-year deal.
He is on a 1-year deal, right? Is there any thought to potentially drafting a corner at this point as well?
Yeah, corner is obviously in the mix.
Okay.
Now, do I feel as if this corner class warrants a top 5 pick? I don't think so. Not in my eyes. But it's the top of this class is nowhere near what I thought the top of last year's class or the year prior to that, where you had Patrick Surtain, J.C. Horn, and those guys went 8 and 9 respectively. Or 9 and 8 respectively. But so I think knowing the Eagles, knowing Howie Roseman, it's probably going to be somewhere along.
All right, we'll go defensive line. We threw running back, and I threw cornerback in there as the 6th one. Let's go up to the Carolina Panthers at number 6. Offensive focus.
Should I just put it in?
You can put it in. I will give you.
It is. This one's easy.
Quarterback. That's it. Just one.
It is. And unfortunately, they played their way a little bit down the draft board here. They were up there. Ideally, you would be right there, not have to trade up. But this is the team. You're one of these two. This is the team you're calling. You're saying, if Scott Fitter is still there, you're calling up Scott Fitter and saying,
he's still going to be there. I think if he was going to be fired, he'd be fired already.
Yeah, we'll see. But if they're calling him up and saying, hey, what's it going to take? Like, what? I guess you're calling him up and saying, here's what it's going to take, actually. So that's what it's going to be. If you're the Panthers, that was kind of the whole why they gave away Christian McCaffrey in the first place, because they said they wanted to go up and get a QB.
Are they about as close as you would get? Because you remember, you opened up this segment, and I agree with you, saying you don't want to force yourself to pick a need. Mm-hmm. But is Carolina essentially as close to forcing yourself to pick a need as a team can possibly be?
I believe so.
I feel like they have to be, right?
That Matt Corral was always kind of a weird pick given the state of that franchise. It was, it was a swing of the bat. It was a little later, but the trade that they made to go up and get him, or I guess a future draft pick to go get him, was always a little odd. And he looked bad preseason and missed the whole year with an injury. So he got no developmental time this season. Right. So that's the unfortunate thing. You really can't roll into next season and say, yep, what we saw from Corral's enough. No, you gotta take a chance. It's a good enough quarterback class that a chance is warranted, in my opinion.
Jags at number 7, and as you said earlier this week, is the 14th time out of 15 years that they're currently picking in the top 10. So where do you think they're going here?
The one position I keep coming back to, that if you're here and you can get a difference maker, it's, oh gosh, what I do there, wide receiver. Okay. If you can get a 1 in that offense, it kind of takes everything and puts it all together. Because you have a real nice number 2 in Christian Kirk, I think, at this point. He's developed into a real great option from the slot. You have a guy in Marvin Jones who's, obviously probably on his way out in terms of career-wise. You don't have too many other options there. You got Evan Ingram at tight end, but you need a guy that it's third down, he's going to win. That's where I'm looking at if I'm the Jacksonville Jaguars. Because after that, oddly enough, they have options at a lot of different positions. They've drafted a ton of positions. They've had a ton of draft picks over the last couple of years. They have options at a lot of different places. Wide receiver is one of the few places that is probably a weakness of this roster where there's no one who's maybe he develops into that guy. I think at this point, that's where I'm looking.
I'm throwing this up here, and I want to get your thoughts. Offensive tackle, right?
Okay.
Because Juwan Taylor is a free agent coming up, all right? Hasn't played very well this year, according to our grades. They have Walker Little, right? Mm-hmm. But are you really going to trust Walker Little to come in and just be fantastic right away at offensive tackle? Maybe you are, but also Cam Robinson, right? You signed Cam Robinson in the deal. He's fine. I know there are some people who still would like for there to be an upgrade over him anyways. We're talking about Trevor Lawrence, okay? Don't play Russian roulette with Trevor Lawrence's career. Mm-hmm. The O-line has to be a priority for the Jacksonville Jaguars over the next couple of years. It needs to be the one where they throw a lot of resources into it. So what do you think about offensive tackle being up here with the Jags?
It's up here, but it's also not a class where I'm that guy's going to be my left tackle of the future. You know, like that's my worry with offensive tackle. And I did really like Walker Little coming out of Stanford. He's heading into year 3, usually the year that is adjacent to the second-year leap of other positions. Offensive line is usually the year 3 leap, where guys really turn into the stars or whatever that they traditionally do at other positions. So, yeah, wide receiver is where I keep going back to, because you kind of hit the nail on the head with Cam Robinson thing. They have a lot of guys who are adequate. Cam Robinson, Jawan Taylor. They don't have a lot of guys who are difference makers.
Right.
Is the problem with this Jags roster.
Right. I don't want adequate on my offensive line when I've got Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. So, all right, I wanted to throw offensive line up there. I wanted to hear what you thought. Cardinals at number 8. What are we going with here?
Oh, man. Cardinals. I'm sorry.
A lot.
We're
going with a lot.
Going
with a lot.
Defensive.
But if we had to sort them out, some of the top ones.
D-tackle.
Okay.
D-tackle is just, they're too soft up the middle. It's a problem for that team. And obviously J.J. Watt, I believe this is the last year of his deal. But at his age, you're not banking on J.J. Watt to be the difference maker he has been year in and year out. So D-line's where I'm looking first. Obviously, they tried to kind of be forward-thinking last year, drafting a couple guys on day 2 along the defensive line. But now both those guys were edges. You're looking at your interior defensive line, but there's a few different positions. Probably anywhere of a quarterback and wide receiver is where I'm looking from this team.
I think they need beef. They just need overall beef. I'm going to go interior offensive line as well.
Beef. Yeah,
just write beef. Yeah.
Oh, I could have wrote beef. Yeah, I could have just wrote bring the beef. I think that's probably their biggest need.
I'll just say also no more linebackers, please. Not anymore.
I would definitely co-sign on that as well. I'd throw corner in here too. I think corner is definitely an area they need to look. Number 8.
That could be where I start to see a first corner coming off.
Just about to say that. Yeah. So that's just around the range where you'd start to think about it, and it's need for the Cardinals. So potential there for them to end up making a cornerback selection. What are the Colts at number 9?
Yeah, we all know we're the Colts at number 9. It's the position that, if you read the Andrew Luck article on ESPN the other day, that was fantastic, by the way, has been kind of why they've struggled ever since he retired. It's quarterback. They are doing well to play themselves into the option of getting a quarterback here at number 9. You'll probably have, I don't think QB3 will be on the board by then, but possibly. I don't know how the NFL is going to necessarily see this quarterback class. It's always a little difficult to predict, but QB is where I'm leaning. You just have to, right? At this point, if you're the Indianapolis Colts, it feels like the Panthers. You just have to.
Feels like it. I'd throw wide receiver up here as well, although like all of these are behind quarterback. You got to get quarterback fixed. Offensive tackle, clearly after this year, it seems like
no Raymond slander. Raymond's good.
I like him. I liked him going into last year, but like
it's guard's been.
Offensive line, I think overall you've got to look at it for as disappointing as it was this year. A couple of people, from doing some research, have said corner for the Colts, but I think that Zay Rodgers is actually doing a lot better. They've got Stephon Gilmore.
How at his age, how long is he going to be useful? It's probably your
word. Sure, but I would definitely put corner. I would definitely put corner below a couple of the other ones that we said here for the Colts. So I'll throw in wide receiver as well. I'll throw in offensive line, but really it's a lot of that one there for the Indianapolis Colts. Atlanta Falcons at number 10. Round us out. What do we got?
D-line again, man. A lot of D-line needy teams. It turns out that if you need D-line, chances are you're drafting high in the draft because it's a position that impacts offenses. It kind of fuels your defense. It's the tone setter. So defensive line, I think they could use a corner across from A.J. Terrell too. I was saying that last year I would have loved to see them get in on the corner class, obviously where they went with Drake London. A great pick as well. So D-line, corner, maybe a second wide receiver as well, even though that offense isn't necessarily built to feature wide receivers. They kind of have the two guys that you would want in that offense right in Kyle Pitts and Drake London. So D-line corner is probably where my head's at.
It's always D-line for me. Any time I do a mock draft for the Atlanta Falcons, and this is a nice spot. I feel like we've got a handful of really good edge rushers here in this class for them to pick. At number 10, interior defensive lineman. I think Jalen Carter's going to be long off the board by then, but if Brian Brzee is still there, I think that could make sense for him. They just need something along the defensive line. And
linebacker, too. Could be not top 10. You're not drafting one of the guys in this linebacker class top 10, but down the board, day 2, day 3.
Yeah, okay. I could see that, too. I could see that, too. Because these weren't just first round picks. These are what we wrote here is a lot of needs for the team. So this could go into their day 2 selections as well. But there we go. That's the top 10. Hopefully our scribbled handwriting was good enough for you guys to follow along with what we got going on.